All right, and welcome everybody to my first impressions of Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. As I mentioned before, I am DM Galabond, and our background ambient sound tonight is brought to you by Sirenscape. All right, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel is a book of adventures and a new campaign setting for 5th edition that takes players to the ethereal plane. The ethereal plane is one of those planes of existence that supposedly borders the natural world or the prime material plane, depending on your preferred edition of D&D. And some of the cosmologies represented in the early editions of D&D, it acts as a buffer between the natural world and the elemental planes. There are other timelines in D&D where the ethereal plane is said to have been destroyed altogether, such as during the Spell Plague, but nothing is truly forever gone in D&D. It's only not canon until some game designer decides there's a good reason to bring it back. So the Radiant Citadel is a sort of adventuring hub or nexus in the ethereal plane. It's a city that's carved out of a vast corpse of some enormous beast that is pierced through by an incredibly huge gemstone known as the Auroral Diamond. Now, there's no clear explanation given for how the city came to be, but it's said that this hub was the meeting place and trade center for 27 civilizations that were scattered across the plains of the multiverse at one time. Now it's a hub for only 15 of those 27 civilizations, or at least only 15 are detailed, meaning there is built in space for a DM to create several new cultures of his or her own imagination that can be part of this place. So it's a setting that has a lot in it, but there's also built-in empty spaces, and that's something that's pretty cool because then if you want to adopt this, make this the home base of a campaign that you are writing, you can really write homebrew stories into this setting, and you have now a pre-made, prefabricated place that your adventurers can go back to between every level or every so often when they need to meet with allies or sponsors or patrons or whoever it is that they have, and before they go out and take on the next adventure. So, like Tales from the Yawning Portal and Candlekeep Mysteries before them, the adventures in Radiant Citadel are not necessarily connected, and they can be played as standalone adventures. But it's also possible for clever DMs to create a way to weave a single story that connects some or all of these adventures into an extended campaign. Now, the gimmick or the connective tissue with these stories in Radiant Citadel is that they're all written by authors who draw upon different real world mythologies and cultures that are part of their own heritage. Now, from that standpoint, it makes Radiant Citadel a great resource for DMs who may want to beg, borrow, and steal from different real world traditions to flavor and evoke certain cultures in their own game world so that things always don't feel like various different shades of medieval Europe or colonial America. Which, let's face it, for a lot of us in the West, when we think of our fantasy, we go somewhere between Game of Thrones and the Arthurian legends, and it all feels like medieval Europe to one extent or another. So the Radiant Citadel also makes a callback to one of the earliest D&D settings, which is Mystara. Now, Mystara was the world where Dave Arneson's Blackmoor was located, and it was the world in which most of the basic D&D edition modules were set. Now, back in those days, they published book-length Gazetteers that detailed the history, the culture, the peoples, traditions, religions, economy, and politics of 15 different kingdoms and cultures that were part of the Mystara setting. And they drew upon everything from classic medieval European mythology to ancient China to pre Columbian North America. But Radiant Citadel condenses the Gazetteers at the end of each adventure to a few paragraphs, and it gives the DM short descriptions and then a few bullet points that help you figure out if you wanted to base a campaign or base other adventures in this particular setting. Here are some of the things that you could do. So that makes this a really nice and really useful resource to, just sort of even flip through and look at those gazetteers. Even if you don't ever use any of the actual adventures, you can draw a lot of inspiration out of those gazetteers and think about things that you may want to spice up, not even a hub in your campaign world, but a place maybe that your adventurers pass through so that it makes the travel from one destination to another in the campaign a little more interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what you're going to find in the Radiant Citadel. And after a little bit, we're actually going to go and look at the book in D&D Beyond and flip through a few of the adventures and talk a little bit about this. So, the introduction of the book is a chapter that sets up the Radiant Citadel itself as the nexus or the hub for all of the adventures that follow. And it details several locations that make this a suitable place for a campaign setting, or the nexus or a hub for a DM or gaming group's own adventure campaign. One of the cool and curious aspects of the location are the appearance of spirits that are known as the Incarnates. Now, these incarnates are formations of animated gemstones that take on the shape of animals, such as this one here, which is the amber scorpion. And each gemstone within the formation is said to hold the spirit of someone from the same world and the same culture. And there's a table in there that gives you an idea of which culture is associated with which gemstones. So each incarnate amalgamation has a dominant personality, but since each individual spirit has different knowledge, a conversation between a PC and one of these incarnates may call up several different personalities as the PCs ask different questions that are known to different ones of the personalities that are part of this. Now, if as a DM, if you really love improv, and if you have a talent for voices, this could be a lot of fun to play, especially if you want to make one or more of these creatures touch points in your campaign that will interact with the characters on a regular basis. So there might be, you might look through this, you might find one of these incarnates and the culture that's associated with and say, okay, this one looks really interesting. This is going to kind of be the main quest giver that my PCs come back to after every one of their adventures when, as they're trying to navigate through the arc of the entire campaign or through a section of the campaign. So the Concord Jewels are another interesting trope in this setting. Now, these huge jewels are in fact enormous orbiting vessels that can touch down in the Radiant Citadel to allow people to disembark and allow passengers and cargo to come on board. Then they fly aloft back into orbit, and when they get into orbit, they teleport to a specific point in a certain world that is connected to the Radiant Citadel. So each concordant jewel is tied to one and only one world, and on that world, the Concord Jewel arrives and departs from only one place. So it's these jewels that can be used to transport the PCs to the various worlds if you want to turn this source book into a campaign of connected adventures. And again, like we said before, this place was supposed to be home to 27 cultures at one time. Only 15 are currently represented. So you could, just invent your own jewel and your own Concord jewel and invent your own place that it's going to go. And you could have them go there, or you could go to a mix of ones that you create yourself and some of the ones that exist. And again, if you're using any of the existing cultures and worlds, you can go to those gazetteers at the end of each adventure and get some ideas of what people may find there. All right, so the Radiant Citadel is led by a council of speakers, and each one represents one of the 15 cultures that are connected to this place. There's a complex system of political checks and balances in place in the governance of the Radiant Citadel, and the speakers are expected to work for both the benefit of the Citadel itself and also to protect the interest of their home cultures. Because one of the things they kind of set up is that uh, this this Radiant Citadel is sort of uh, part stock exchange, if you will, and part United Nations. So the idea is that at some point in the distant past, all 27 of these cultures used to meet at this citadel where they would trade not only goods and services, but ideas between each other. And they kind of all run, and the 15 that are left all run this place jointly. And these speakers are tied to the location such that if any individual speaker leaves the Radiant Citadel for more than 30 days, then parts of the Radiant Citadel actually start to shut down and things don't function the way they should. So it's sort of a weird trope that they have in that regard. And of course, your game, you can use the way they did that, or you can change rules and do whatever you want. Now, the recent history of the Radiant Citadel can be traced back to one of the current speakers, Speaker Shola. And she is the current speaker from the culture called Arkaran Sangar. And Speaker Shola is the form that she takes in the Radiant Citadel, which is that of a human female, past middle age, kind of wizened and dark hair, a little bit of salt and pepper in the hair and everything, and some laugh lines around her face and everything. But she is, in fact, an ancient brass dragon who spent much of her adult life researching the supposed location of the Radiant Citadel, and she one day dreams of finding the other 12 lost cultures that were part of the Citadel in ancient times. Now, the speakers really only play marginal roles in some of the adventures as quest givers or sources of information. But if a DM wanted to turn this location into the nexus of a homebrew campaign, then you could have them be as important or as unimportant as you wish. So the introduction also included some notes on the economy, trade, and points of interest within the Radiant Citadel. However, the vast majority of the detailed map of the city is left without named landmarks, so DMs can fill in whatever kind of residents and businesses and other points of interest they desire to make the city suitable for your own game. All right, now we're going to talk about two of the adventures in particular. And I'm going to try to talk about them in a way that's not spoilery. Then we're going to kind of look at the structure of the book and see how these things all come together. There are, I believe, there's 13 adventures in this book, and they are suitable for PCs from levels 1 through 14. And the reason that is because the first story actually spans levels 1 and 2. All the rest of them just are a single character level. So the first adventure is something called Salted Legacy, and it's intended for characters of first and or second level. Now, Salted Legacy takes place in the culture of the Siebsuska Valley. I hope I pronounced that right. Siebsuska Valley, which is a little coastal location, and in the middle of this valley there is a night market known as Din Sing. So the story focuses on a conflict between two vendors whose families are longtime members and longtime rivals in the market space. So the PCs witness some of the conflict and they are recruited to help resolve the issue by determining which of the vendors is ultimately at fault. So the adventure is low on combat, but it uses a series of novel challenges and contests that allow the PCs to win the trust of the merchants in their market, which in turn allows them to learn more of the history of the conflict, and that helps them gain clues which will ultimately aid them in resolving the issue. So the Gazetteer for this adventure describes the night market of Dinsing and also the wider valley region, with some of its people groups, customs, geography, legends, and traditions. Now, a cool feature of this book are a series of questions for character generation. So it suggests that if players want to make a character that is native to one of these cultures, the DM can ask several questions that lead the player to figure out how the character and his or her family are connected to the region. There's also some suggested names and surnames tied to the culture, and even some thumbnail ideas to help spur some DM homebrew adventures that are set in each of these regions. So, my favorite part of this particular adventure of Salted Legacy is the description of the night market itself and the variety of merchants and wares that can be found there. The culture that Salted Legacy is based on definitely is inspired by food, and there's all kinds of exotic and tasty sounding foods that can be sampled in the night market and purchased from the stalls of its vendors. So the map of the region is also pretty cool. It might just be the perfect size if a DM wanted to start a homebrew campaign by focusing on the local surroundings. So you have an initial central settlement and then enough interesting features to explore nearby without having to fill in an entire continent before you know what sort of game that you as the DM and your players decide you want to play. And as you all get a feel for the characters and the kind of adventures that motivate them, and then once you figure that out by exploring this little small area, then that helps you go ahead and build out the rest of your game world for as wide as the campaign is going to spread so that you can build adventures that are going to be interesting for you to run and exciting and interesting for your players to experience. All right. Now, the second adventure in this book is called Written in Blood, and it is intended for third level characters. Now, this adventure involves a missing youth and attacks by farmers who seem to have been afflicted with some kind of madness or perhaps a demonic curse or demonic malady. So, Written in Blood takes place in the culture of God's Breath, and the action happens in a settlement called Promise, as well as the wilderness beyond it and its surrounding farms. So, an annual festival is approaching when the folk of the town, or wherein the folk of the town recount the important events of the history of God's Breath as an act of community and remembrance for those who have died. So, the festival is interrupted by a violent attack which is perpetrated by farmers from an outlying cooperative where the goddaughter of one of the town elders lives and works. The PCs are recruited and dispatched by this elder to go see if the young woman is alive and safe, and to provide help if possible, or to bring back news if the girl no longer lives. So along the way, the PCs meet some very interesting storytellers and really colorful characters, and there are some combat and non-combat encounters that will test their wits and their dice rolls. So my favorite part about this adventure is the legend behind the pantheon of this culture. The land is slowly changing, and there's a reason known at the time of this story only to the gods. However, setting a campaign in a time and place with this kind of changing environment could lead to some really interesting adventures and great stories around the table. Another thing I really like about this adventure is the new monster that is introduced to D&D 5e in this story. And in fact, I liked it so much that I am going to make it the subject of next week's Monster Monday. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few more minutes. Okay, So, most of the stories from Journeys to the Radiant Citadel are from cultures that encompass smaller regions of individual worlds that are left unnamed and unmapped, making this source book a great jumping off point for a DM that is looking for a spark of an idea to start their own homebrew setting. So, in all, the book contains 13 adventures. Each one includes at least a tangent connection to the Radiant Citadel, but they are self contained enough that they could be pulled out of this setting and placed into another established D&D setting, or even into your own homebrew campaign if you just get to the point where you are stuck, you don't have any other ideas, you need something for your players to do for a couple of sessions, and you can pick one of these stories that's at an appropriate level, um, figure out how they get to a place where this is, and then boom, you run it and you have something for them to do for a while. Now, I really like how each story captures the ethos and spirit of an individual culture and how it makes the culture that the adventure is set in come alive, or at least it makes part of that culture come alive. In the real world, we often associate unfamiliar cultures with certain aspects, like foods or clothing or customs or annual festivals, for instance. And Radiant Citadel seems to take a similar approach with these fantasy cultures. Now, the gazetteer that accompanies each adventure paints a thumbnail sketch of the culture beyond the story, and each one provides enough details without putting you in a straitjacket of, strict boundaries, that individual DMs can use them as a springboard to create a region of an existing game setting that they are using, or to develop an entirely new game setting based on this particular culture. So most of the stories also introduce a new monster to D&D 5e, one that is integrated into the legends and folklore of each of these fantasy cultures. So, reviewing these monsters and seeing how they figure into the stories where they appear is also kind of a cool, rich treasure trove for DMs to mine when it comes to creating adversaries to challenge players in our own homebrew settings in a way that really seems organic to the setting and not like you just found something cool in the monster manual that you wanted to throw against your players, and after you stop and think about it for a while, it's like, yeah, would you find this monster in this setting? I don't know, but it's a really cool monster. I want to use it anyway. These monsters really are kind of feel like they're really born out of the place where you find them. So if you look at how they do that and what aspects of the monster line up with everything else that's going on, it can kind of help you when you want to homebrew and create your own monsters, can help you figure out, okay, so in this region, the people are like this, and these are the kinds of terrains and all this other type of stuff. So, what would make sense from a standpoint of a monster that feels like it belongs in this ecology, in this geography, in this climate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is another cool aspect of this. So I want to distill down sort of my positive takeaways before we go through the book and look at it. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to flip the order. I am going to go and we're going to flip over and take a look at the actual book itself. So, this is the journey through the Radiant Citadel, and you might have noticed that my background for tonight is the cover art. So this is a cover art, and this is an image of that night market from the first story. And you can see how it's kind of a really odd mixture of sort of, I guess, more primitive types of things with some very modern things. So it seems like there's either magical, almost like magical neon signs that light up this market, as well as everything being, sort of aside from that, everything fits into kind of a fantasy um, a fantasy swords and sorcery type of culture. So we start off with the Radiant Citadel, talks about all of the features and noteworthy sites, the Concord Jewels, a little bit of a slice of life in the Citadel, the factions or groups, the way it's defended, how you get to and from the Citadel, some of the legends and lore surrounding it. Um, Ideas for adventures that you could set within the Citadel itself, and then how you could use the Citadel as sort of a campaign hub. And then you have each of the stories, and the stories all they give you a little bit of a background on the story, and then it just jumps in right to the entire story, uh, tells you everything that goes on, lets you go through it. And at the end of each story, you have this gazetteer. So the gazetteer is, as I said, this is where you get an idea about the culture. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at one of these gazetteers. So you have the Sieb Sunko Gazetteer is the valley here. Let's see, where is the map? Okay, here's the map right here. So the night market is right here, kind of almost centrally located. Then there's these mountains around. You have this big river where it kind of is one natural border, and then sort of a conceit where it kind of feels like you're in a zone in something like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, where you run too close to the wall and then you can't go any farther. So it's like you have this wall around here, but of course that means that you are then able to figure out everything that goes in here. Now all these locations are named, and the gazetteer will give you a little bit of information about each one, but they are by no means detailed. So you could then figure out what you wanted to put in here. And as always, um, in each of these source books, they give you both a DM version of the map and they give you a player version. So you could take this player version and you could show this to your players, and it will show the items on the map, but it won't give you any names. So if you wanted to change the names of these locations, you could very easily do that and use it kind of. This is what I was saying. You could take something like this and just have this be a starting area for a campaign, and if you run this as the first adventure in a campaign, then the players by the end of it will make some friends and allies and some contacts within this night market. And because that's one of the most vital central areas of this whole region, they would be good quest givers to then hand out some of the other adventures that you would go on until you exhaust your exploration of this valley and the story moves on to somewhere else, to a wider part of the world. So you have some information about the hallmarks. It's known for its cosmopolitan markets and its people's tight family bonds and ties to nature. The people that describes humans: dark, wavy to curly hair, brown eyes, and skin tones varying from medium tan to deep brown. And then along with humans, there's dragonborn, gnomes, kobolds, and orcs are among the land's most populous residents. So it's like, oh, okay, so if I'm going to put other people in here, what are the kind of people that I can do? And some of those different races actually appear within the adventure itself. And it talks about languages. And one of the cool things that this adventure, or that this book introduces, is it introduces regional languages. Just like here, you can go to, you can go across a national border in Europe, And, within the space of 15 miles, you might run into people that are speaking French and people that are speaking German and speaking people that are speaking Flemish and, people that are speaking Italian and all kinds of different languages that you run into. Well, each one of these areas has kind of its own regional language. So in this case, it's Mina, which translates to river tongue, and that's the native language of this valley. But most locals also speak Common and Draconic because of the number of humanoids and dragonborn that are here. So then it gives you a few noteworthy sites. The Densing Night Market, where the adventure is set, that gets the most edges or the most information. Then you have the Outer Edges, the Avern Mountains, and it just kind of maybe will name check a couple of the other places that are shown on the map. And then it gives you a little bit of life in Sea of Sungo. So it kind of gives you information that people here would know. So that's stuff that you can internalize as the DM. And then as your players are having conversations with locals, you can maybe either drop out a couple of these facts, or if they ask questions, you can use this information to answer those questions. So the Merchant Collective kind of runs the market. There's 5 families that kind of run this whole region. There is the fact this culture here is kind of a collectivist society, but it's centered on family and deep group loyalties. They're welcoming to outsiders. They believe in the spirits of the land, and then a few name ideas that you can put in here. And then there's a few legends. And then this one here gives you some ideas about some adventures that you could run that are not written, but it's just sort of these are thumbnail sketches of adventures. You could take some of these and you could run with them and go off and do your own kind of adventure based on that idea. Then here's the sort of character creation. Uh, if you have characters or players that say, wow, I'd really like to make a player that comes from one of these cultures. Well, you can then figure out how much you want to tell them about what each of these cultures are. And if they find one that they like, then you can help them to ask questions, or you can help them develop their character and their backstory by asking them specific questions while they're making your character. So, what's your family known for? Are you artisans, chefs, outcast, or something else? Why? Because artisans and chefs are some of the more important people in this particular culture. And what kind of reputation does your family have? So, what have you done or refused to do in the name of your family? So, did this protect your family or did it protect yourself? Did this change your relationship with your family? And what's your connection to the Dinsing night market? Does your family have the favor of the families that run the market, or are they kind of on the outs? What do you look forward to buying whenever you visit the market? And do you oppose the idea of the market expanding, or do you welcome it? And then, of course, there are the stat block of whatever new creature is introduced. And instead of having a separate section at the end of the source book where all of the monsters, all the new monsters are collected together, they have intentionally put them at the end of each of these stories. So if you even just sort of took everything out of context and kept it all together, you would have everything you need to run this adventure, including the stat block of the new monster that is here. So that's kind of the way each of the chapters beyond the first chapter is set up. And then we'll go back and we'll take a look a little bit. Okay, come on, computer. You're being slow. You're being slow. Yes. Okay. Don't you just love live streams when things are slow? Okay, thank you, Kevin. Glad you're enjoying it. Now, we'll take a look at the actual Radiant Citadel itself and kind of some of the idea of what that looks like again as we do that. I've gotten I got a little lazy tonight. I just thought I would navigate through it. Sometimes I plan a little bit better and I open multiple tabs and set them up on the pages so that it's a little bit faster to go from one page to the other. But I didn't do that tonight. Shame, shame. All right, so this is a map of the Radiant Citadel. And as you can see, it's kind of this. Now, it claims that the actual city itself is built on the corpse of a monster. It never tells us what kind of monster it is. And it just says that this big, huge auroral diamond is shoved through it like, the head of a spear or something, the broken off head of a spear. And so you can see how this diamond juts out through the top and juts out through the bottom. But then all of these areas here, you get this entire detailed map, and you get the auroral diamond itself, but you only get several different places that are actually named. So you could then go and build out whatever you wanted in all these other sections of the map and turn that into kind of your own little setting so that your version of the Radiant Citadel would be unique and different from every other DM's version of the Radiant Citadel, even though you guys are all using the same map. So that's kind of cool. Then it details some of the locations in there, the Court of Whispers, and then you kind of get these images of all of these incarnates, as we said, where everyone is made up of a collection of gemstones in the form of an animal, and then each gemstone has a spirit of somebody that comes from that particular culture. So the ruby pangolin is the dawn incarnate Siebsungo. So this is the one that's tied with that culture where we were just talking about with Salted Legacy. So then you have the House of Convalescence, the Keening Gloom. Now, the Keening Gloom is something that exists outside of the Radiant Citadel, and I don't think that they give us any kind of visuals or maps, but it's this idea that when you're in the Radiant Citadel, you're sort of in almost like you're in the eye of a hurricane within the ethereal plane. And if you look out into the night sky and you look far enough away from the edge of the Radiant Citadel, you can see this big storm swirling all around you. And there are times that the storm seems to close in and get closer, and then there are times it seems to relax and get farther away. And one of the other things that happens that they talk about is that big diamond, that big crystal that explodes out of the top and bottom of the Radiant Citadel. It constantly changes color, and it almost never goes to the same color twice. And it gives some theories about why that happens. And then, of course, as a DM, if you wanted to incorporate this into a campaign, you could either use one of those theories that they give you in the book, or you could make up all your own reasons. So there's the Palace of Exile. These are this is where kind of all of the people meet. Preserve of the Ancestors is a sprawling domed wilderness cut into the heart of the auroral diamond. Lush vegetation grows directly out of the diamond. The expanse is dotted with jackalberry trees, whistling thorn, and zebra wood. So it's almost like you step into this diamond and you're like in a wilderness area. So you might think of it as something like a like stepping into the TARDIS if you're a Doctor Who fan, where it's a whole lot bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And also where, absurdly, you go into this crystalline structure and yet it feels like an outdoor wilderness somewhere. So then there's the trade discal, uh, which is the trade hub. It's a massive marketplace designed so the founding civilizations could trade on equitable terms. Serves the needs of the cities and nations or major trading companies rather than individual sellers or producers. And of course, that is all enforced by high taxes and fees. Um, so there's a little bit of politics and a little bit of economics, but it's it's sort of all fantasy stuff. So you could look at it and you could say, yeah, okay, I buy that and I'll do that. Or you could look at it and say, yeah, all right, I'm not going to have it run that way. I'm going to have it operate some completely different. Once again, your table, your game. As a DM, you're the final arbiter. This is just a great way of giving you giving you some jumping off points and some good ideas for starting. So the Concord Jewels, it lists each of the civilizations and what jewel they're associated with. So the Concord Jewels were those big things that are kind of like spaceships, if you will, that bring people to and take people from the Radiant Citadel and then teleport to the uh, worlds or the cultures where the adventures are set. And also the jewels are the same jewels, I believe. Yeah, the jewels are the same jewels that are associated with each of the um, incarnates. So each of these little animal spirits, if you will. So there's rules for how you can control a Concord jewel. So if you go to the center of the jewel, there's actually controls, and if you make an Arcana check and spend a minute, you can learn how to basically have some limited control over the Conquered Jewel. And there's only three things you can do. You can land it, you can embark, which basically means it will, if it's on the ground, it will rise up 600 feet off the ground and hover. If it's in the air, it will descend, and it will, it will descend to the ground and then plane shift. So it can shift away. Then there are clavigers. They oversee the Concord Jewels. Each speaker chooses the clavigers for the jewel linked to that speaker's civilization. Then a little bit about life. So life in the Citadel, what people know, art and culture, diplomacy, governance and politics, law enforcement and justice, lifestyle and society, tariffs and taxation, yada, yada, yada. And then some of the different groups, which you might think of as factions. And once again, here's a list of all the incarnates and what kind of animals, animal forms, the speakers of the ancestors, the role of the speakers, the power of the speakers, how the speakers are bound to the Citadel. And here's Speaker Shola we talked about. This is the form she takes while she's in there, but her actual form is that of an ancient brass dragon. And for some of the more important individuals, they do give you sort of that personality trait and whatnot. And they give you some pictures of some of the people, but they definitely don't give you all of, they don't give you images for all of the people. And then here's some ideas on how you can use the Citadel and how you can connect the adventures that are in this source book, or how you can connect your own adventures to the Radiant Citadel. So that is a separate section of the book all by itself that just sort of gives you an idea of how you could use this location as a hub. And so that is a pretty cool idea from this particular book and this particular setting. All right, so now we are going to go back, and I am going to talk a little bit about the positive takeaways that I have from this adventure, and then some of the things that, at least for me, feel like were a bit of a miss in this adventure or in this source book. And you're free to agree with me, you're free to disagree, and then we'll also take a look and see if anybody has questions about what we've discussed, and we can go and take a look in more detail if you do. All right, so some of the positive takeaways that I have. The conceit of Journeys to the Radiant Citadel is that Wizards of the Coast solicited adventures from designers that have connections to very different and diverse cultures and traditions from around the globe. And that effort has succeeded in creating a collection which avoids the trope of every place you go feeling like you're in another part of fantasy medieval Europe or fantasy colonial America. And it's kind of what we talked about before, where, not only for myself, but a lot of the DMs that I have played with as a player, and a lot of the DMs that run games online, it, because we have such a tie to um, stories of medieval Europe and fantasy settings that came out of writers from Western cultures, everything kind of feels like it's a version of Game of Thrones or of, um, you know, of some of these other. Settings. So there's always castles, there's always knights, there's always, damsels in distress and dragons and, villages with thatched huts and keeps with stone walls and all that sort of stuff that, you find littering Western literature. This really does a good job of breaking those tropes and giving you very different feeling areas that feel like you're an entire worlds away from that kind of setting, and that can be very refreshing as a DM, where you want to represent something completely different. So the book is filled with a rich tapestry of architecture, sounds, stories, spices, traditions, legends, and peoples that are a treasure trove of inspirations for DMs looking to start a new homebrew setting or to fill in some as yet unexplored portion of an existing game setting. The Gazetteers are a great addition, distilling down the essential details of a culture to usable bite-sized chunks that not only offer the look and feel of a place and its people, but offer some sketches of adventure ideas that make sense within that location. And the Radiant Citadel itself is a really cool addition to 5e. There's yet another nexus or hub for a series of far-flung adventures, and reminds you of some places that come from editions of the past, kind of like the city of Sigil was in the old Planescape setting. And of course, we've seen the handwriting on the walls from Wizards of the Coast that we're going to be getting a good dose of Planescape coming up in the next year or so. So who knows? They might bring back and fully detail Sigil for 5th edition as well. All right. Now, so that's what I really like. The thing that I dislike the most is I dislike how it feels like we've been a little bit cheated as DMs of how we can do our own further research. And here's what I mean. They, within each of the adventures, they do not give us any notes on which of the authors in the credits wrote each story. And they also don't give us any notes on which real world cultures influenced the origins of the adventures. So as I read through these and I skimmed through these adventures, there were things that for me, from my limited scope and my limited view of the world, there were a couple of things that said, huh, that sounds a little bit like Creole or Caribbean voodoo type of influence. But that's because I'm in America, and the closest thing that I know to something that feels like what I'm seeing in these adventures is Caribbean, or it was Creole or Caribbean voodoo. I don't really know if that's the actual culture that inspired it. It could be that it was actually a culture from somewhere in South America or in Asia or in Africa or something. And it would be really nice if they said, this story is loosely based on the peoples, the traditions, the folklore of such and such a people group from such and such a country. And, that way, if I wanted to flesh out more of an area, I could then go do research on my own about what are some of the other folklore and some of the other traditions out of that area. So I kind of feel like we got cheated out of having that information included in the book. So that disappoints me a little bit. And then on the other hand, they have this tendency, and it's something that I've noticed over the last few years with Wizards of the Coast. And I suppose it's a product of the fact that they are an American company in, 21st century America, uh, which, as we all know, has become very, very polarized. So at the same time, they don't really give us a lot of details on how to go about mining more information from each of these cultures if we want to enrich our game setting with it. They then turn around in the forward and they get a little bit preachy. They suggest that there are appropriate ways of, using cultures other than your own, and appropriate ways of sort of doing accents or doing descriptions of peoples and whatnot and everything like that. And it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to give me any help by telling me which culture this is actually from, then you're also making me a little bit reluctant to kind of lean in to making making something feel too authentic, because I might read one story and say, oh, well, this is clearly something that is talking about the Mexican Festival of the Dead, that happens right after Halloween. But actually, the author is like, no, you misread that. It doesn't come from there at all. It comes from some completely different culture. You're insulting me because you're doing that. Well, okay, Wizards of the Coast, tell me which culture I'm dealing with so that I can be better at that. So I get a little bit annoyed with them on the one hand, not giving me enough details to know what I'm going, and then on the other hand, kind of wagging an editorial finger and saying, well, you should really be appropriate when it. Okay, come on. If you want people to be appropriate, you got to give them more information. So that's a little bit of a negative that I feel about this. And you might be listening to this and you might say, well, that's kind of a small point and nitpick. And yeah, for the most part it is. But it's I feel like at the end of the day, in a D&D game, it's a game that relies on the creativity of the players around the table and the creativity of the DM. And the only rule that really matters in any D&D game is that everybody's having fun. It's a really good D&D game if everybody at the table is enjoying it. Now, it doesn't mean, a D&D game should not have to try to appeal to everybody, because there's no way that any one of us are able to appeal to everyone's sensibilities. There are things that just are kind of completely beyond my radar that are going to be really important to some other people. And because I don't touch on those, I don't include those, I don't give those lip service, there are people that are going to be like, yeah, I don't really like that. And then there are other games and other people that do things that I look at and I go, okay, yeah, that just kind of seems a little bit weird to me. But, hey, they're having fun. So weird is good. You do what's fun for you and your group. It doesn't matter if it doesn't appeal to me. Same way, if I run a game or something, it doesn't matter if what I do appeals to you or to your friends. You can go and you can find a different game and you can find something that appeals more to you. So it's just a bit of this, it feels like they're trying to have it both ways, and I get a little bit annoyed with that sort of attitude. But again, like I said, it's 2022. We are in America. As we know, everything is extremely polarized here, and so it kind of is, it's almost, uh, if you're going to, unless you're going to make a very conscious effort just to not sort of deal in any kind of reflection on what's happening in the real world, then whatever you do is going to be something that uh, rankles some people and really appeals to other people. So, mm, to each his or her own. But I think you can. I think if you sort of just ignore a little bit the preachy aspect of the forward, I think this is an excellent source book. And it's something that you can really use, really dig your teeth into, and you can mine for a lot of great and creative and cool ideas that you could use in your own homebrew settings and in your own games. All right, well, that pretty much takes us to the end of my prepared remarks, with the exception of one thing. And that is, I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit about what our subject of Monster Monday is going to be. So, this coming Monday, we are going to be looking at a new monster that comes out of this book, out of the story Written in Blood. And this monster is a monster called the Soul Shaker. Now, the Soul Shaker is imagined as a sort of semi intelligent collective of all of these different crawling claws. Crawling claws, which are the disembodied undead hands. And what we're going to do on Monday night, we're going to look at the Soul Shaker as it's written. We're going to look a little bit at the crawling claws and talk a little bit about how the crawling claws relate to the Soul Shaker. And then we are going to imagine variants of the Soul Shaker that you could throw at your tier 2 party, your tier 3 party, and even your tier 4 party. Because this is a this is a CR4 monster, which means it's good to use against parties that are about 3rd level. But what if you have a party that's like 6th or 7th level? What if you have a party that's 12th or 13th level? What if you have a party that's 17th level? What are you going to do with them? Well, I took a look at some features of some other undead, and I kind of imagined some different variants of the Soul Shaker, and we're going to talk about those on Monday night. I would really love it if you've been sticking with us this far. I'd love it if you would either follow us on Twitch or subscribe to the Twitch channel. And then if you are not watching us live, if you are watching us on the archives, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel where you're watching this, and click the notification bell so that you get notified every time there is new content that we upload to that channel. I have been DM Galabond. This has been my first impressions of the Radiant Citadel. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Hope you will come back next Monday night onto the YouTube channel and watch the Monster Monday. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.